Today, Joe Biden delivers a victory speech promising to restore decency and bring the United States together after a bitterly disputed election campaign.
I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify. This is the time to heal in America.
Large crowds of people celebrate in cities across the United States after the agonising four-day wait for results.
But there's sorrow, anger and mistrust on the other side, with serving President Donald Trump yet to concede defeat.
And back home, restrictions are eased in Victoria after a 9th straight day of no coronavirus cases or deaths.
Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Corowa.
And I'm Jeremy Fernandez. We have another hour of continuing coverage of the US election result. We'll hear from our correspondents on the ground and get reaction from around the United States and here in Australia.
So, to recap, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have taken to the stage to declare victory in the US presidential election. Thousands of supporters gathered in their cars to hear the President-elect and Vice President-elect speak in Mr. Biden's home state, Delaware.
Joe Biden reached out to supporters of the US President Donald Trump, pledging to be a president focused on unifying rather than dividing America.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They're Americans. The Bible tells us to everything there is a season, a time to build, a time to reap and a time to sow, and a time to heal. This is the time to heal in America.
Joe Biden there. Our correspondent Greg Jennett is at Black Lives Matter Plaza outside the White House. Greg, it's been nearly 4 hours since that speech was made and the crowds are still out in force on the streets there.
And not just here, but certainly here, Jeremy. They've dissipated a little, but you're still talking several hundreds of people just outside the White House. But also, you can see the crowd behind me, but also at almost every major park and corner for block after block after block in Washington, D.C., and then go and repeat that in cities all across this country. I caught some updates before I came here, Jeremy, and it was bewildering almost, the number of spontaneous celebrations that had broken out almost instantly, really, from the moment that the television networks all agreed it was time to make the call that Joe Biden's lead could not be overrun at any point in the count now by Donald Trump. And then the rest, as they say, is history. But Joe Biden, for his part, Jeremy, is really, I suppose, trying to frame now what his presidency might look like. And he has made the point in Wilmington, Delaware, that it's down to business and he wants to define the mandate. What is it that Americans have voted him into office to do? Well, we might take a listen now to that mandate argument that Joe Biden is putting out at the outset.
Now this campaign is over. What is the will of the people? What is our mandate? I believe it's this. Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country. And the battle to save our planet by getting climate under control. The battle to restore decency, defend democracy, and give everybody in this country a fair shot. That's all they're asking for, a fair shot.
So Joe Biden there, Greg, and the president-elect outlining where he sees his priorities. But of course, we can't forget as well that America has been riven by division. There was still significant support for Donald Trump in the vote count, although Joe Biden, of course, the victor. What sort of America will Joe Biden and the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris be inheriting?
Well, I think he's trying to address that from the get-go, Miriam, by speaking of inclusion, because you're absolutely correct. 70 million people voted for Donald Trump in this election. The turnout, the vote for him was actually stronger nationally than it was 4 years ago. So there are people who are not giving up on the Republican brand. I guess we'll have to wait for some time to pass to decide whether they've given up on the Donald Trump brand of politics, but there's considerable support. So what is Joe Biden trying to do? He's trying to say that I'm with you too. He's putting the hand across the aisle, as they say in American politics. And that's significant because we haven't heard a lot of that in the US in its political rhetoric and discourse for the last 4 years in particular. And I guess it's also something that Kamala Harris, in becoming Vice President-elect, has also tried to address in her opening remarks, which we might just take a listen to.
Congressman John Lewis, before his passing, wrote, "Democracy is not a state, it is an act." And what he meant was that America's democracy is not guaranteed. It is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. To guard it and never take it for granted. And protecting our democracy takes struggle, it takes sacrifice, but there is joy in it, and there is progress, because we, the people, have the power to build a better future. And when our very democracy was on the ballot in this election, with the very soul of America at stake, and the world watching, you ushered in a new day for America.
So, Greg, in the last few hours, we have not heard from Donald Trump. He hasn't conceded his defeat and is still, as far as we know, vowing to contest the election result. What does that mean?
Well, everything stands, doesn't it, until it's rescinded or revoked, Jeremy. So that is the stated position of the US president, that he's going to go down fighting, that he's going to race to state courts, seek to highlight irregularities, give us evidence, he said, and then eventually perhaps kick this all the way up to the US Supreme Court to, in his mind, settle one way or another whether this was a legitimate election and whether the counting of those ballots over the last 4 days was fair and free and according to law. Well, that's the stated position of Donald Trump. But when the trail goes cold, when the tweets stop, you, I guess, are in your rights, Jeremy, to start to wonder what is his next move. Is he going to persevere with this strategy? Or might he just be decompressing a little himself, Donald Trump, to try and absorb exactly what's gone on in America today, the momentum, the groundswell, the enthusiasm that's being shown in locations right outside his front and back door, it must be said. And is that giving him pause to reconsider where to go next? Of course, none of us, no one has the answers to those questions, but it's the live question that the world awaits an answer for now, Jeremy.
Well, Greg, the momentum, you mentioned that word a couple of times throughout the course of the day there. It certainly seems to have shifted now to President-elect Joe Biden. And of course, he also outlined in his victory speech that he wants to get to work on Monday. He's going to be sitting down, talking through what he considers, of course, a huge priority there, which is tackling coronavirus.
Yeah, it's all compare and contrast, particularly when you're talking about the pandemic, Miriam, because Donald Trump tried to make a virtue of the fact that he was non-interventionist. He's chief of staff. Mark Meadows, who subsequently fell under the spell and actually caught coronavirus himself in the latter days of the count this week. They took the view that you can't control the virus, so we shouldn't even try. Reopening the economy is most important. The contrast to that is the Joe Biden approach. It's try and get the state governors together, try to get some uniform national action going. And that's what he's flagging from Monday, as you say. He wants to get the experts around the table, take the advice, start to work out the implementation of a national plan to tackle this coronavirus. Maybe wait and see about a vaccine as well, if all goes well on that front. And then, and only then, to start to reopen the economy and the schools and everything that goes with it in 2021. So he's put a stake in the ground on that, absolutely, Miriam. Priority one, and he'll start on that within days.
Our correspondent Greg Jennett there at the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington.
Let's now bring in Michael Ramos from Democrats Abroad. Michael joins us from Melbourne. Michael, what did you make of that speech, and how well do you think it reaches to those supporters of Donald Trump?
I'm sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about President-elect Biden's speech?
Yes, Mr. Biden's speech. He promised to unify the country, noting, of course, that more than 70 million people voted for his opponent, Donald Trump. How well did he unify or make a start towards unifying people in that speech?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I will say this. I'm not a Republican, but as soon as he said that, I looked on Twitter and I had already seen some Trump voters already start to say unifying things. So that gives me a little bit of hope. So there was somebody who is a famous figure, who is a widely known Trump supporter, who now is giving all kinds of messages saying, you know, in terms of unity, I really hope to see my family get back together at the table with different political views. I know the neighbors across the street, you know, let's take down the yard signs and let's start having barbecues again. So I think some of Biden's commentary may have contributed to this unifying effect that we're starting to see right now.
And Michael, when Joe Biden was making that speech, he said if he was to sum up America in one word, he would use the word possibility. Is that the sense that we're feeling? I mean, there's been widespread celebration across the United States. The world is watching. And of course, many had been fearing in the days leading up to the election and, of course, the count being called, that there might actually be, you know, some violence across the United States in response to that, given how divided politics has been. So what do you make of this sense now of possibility? Where do you see possibility being for America?
The way I interpret that is I interpret Joe Biden's vision of possibility as piggybacking on Barack Obama's philosophy of hope. I think most Americans, regardless of your party, see an optimistic future for the country. Now, if you ask people right there on the day, you know, what is your general sense of the direction of the country, and are we, you know, headed off a cliff? Those are different responses compared to how do you see the United States long term. So I do think that it's important to continue pushing this message. This isn't just a Democratic thing. I think most Americans want and need to hear hope and possibility.
That message of hope and change, though, which Barack Obama made in his victory speech, kind of fell flat after a couple of terms, didn't it? Because it meant so many different things to so many people, and really, at the end of the day, so many people were disappointed by not actually achieving the things that they were hoping for.
Yeah, that's a topic I can go on forever about. I guess when you're Barack Obama, who is somebody incredibly inspirational, and the hand that he's dealt with, a Republican House, a Republican Senate, conservative judges, making things hard for you. I think he did the best with what he could, what any American could do in that position at that time. So I think if we didn't have a Barack Obama, we might be in a worse place right now.
Michael, in terms of this now, it's a victory for a Democratic president-elect. What will this mean? Because, of course, we've been framing this in terms of the response to the 4 years of Donald Trump and how Republicans will need to be negotiated with, particularly with the houses of Congress seeming to be pitted against one another yet again, so obstacles there. But in terms of how Democrats are framing what they want their agenda to be, how does Joe Biden contend with the fact that there was so much support for someone like Bernie Sanders? You know, will Joe Biden be seen as not going far enough at times with his agenda, because there are obviously a lot of high hopes around things like the new Green Deal? How does Joe Biden tackle those polarising and contrasting agendas and wants and hopes?
Okay, so I love talking about Congress. That's my favorite topic, having worked in Congress myself. I think when you have the Democratic Party now established in a position to govern, you have leverage over the Republicans now. So you have the House of Representatives and the White House. And it's not that you can't get anything done anymore. Now you're really putting the pressure on the Senate to work with you, as opposed to you having to always feel like you're getting the short end of the stick in negotiations. So I think when it comes to other factions of the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders wing, the establishment Dems and conservative Democrats and so forth, this has been such a long, drawn-out campaign. As you know, starting January 21st, the campaign begins for the next presidential cycle. And everybody's just kind of tired of politics and elections right now. They need to get on board, and they know that. I think most policymakers from all parts of the spectrum, they're going to get on board and try to work together to get things done. Now, it may not be Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. It may not be Nancy Pelosi's, wish list of whatever she wants, but they're going to be forced to work together with Biden, all sitting at the table to get things done. That's the way I see it.
As someone sitting here in Australia, how do you view the development of the relationship between the Morrison government and the Biden presidency? As somebody who's very active with the Democrats abroad Australia, I don't want to comment on foreign policy in particular, but I will say that I'm optimistic that a Biden administration will work closely with Australia, just like we have been over the last century. And I'll leave it at that.
It's interesting as well that, we're hearing words like truth being used, decency, fairness. It's also important to think about how Donald Trump, he's associated with the term fake news. So the role of the media as well. It was interesting to see that Fox News was one of those organisations that was prepared to be there calling Pennsylvania for Joe Biden, and so thereby seeing him, take that next step. How do you see the way that media now attempts to, negotiate its transition from the Trump era and seeing as, basically a public enemy to, re-establishing institutions? And what do we know by truth at this point? And does the American public trust what's being said and how it's presented?
Well, that's a really divisive question. For me personally, I have faith and confidence in the media. I believe in the First Amendment, freedom of the press. Say whatever it is that you want to say, as long as it's truthful. I think that as we move forward, it's going to be difficult with the Trump message of fake news, fake polls, you're a fake journalist. Those kind of comments when somebody is genuinely trying to just simply report the facts and ask questions. that's going to be hard to move forward. But that's good for the institution of journalism to kind of reevaluate how are we going to go about approaching politics or asking political questions that seems more fair, that seems more neutral, less bias. And I think it's just a good, I'm not saying that what Trump said was good, because I don't think it was. I think he has a lot of divisive commentary. But I think now that he has said those things, it's good that all of the press just kind of take a moment to self-reflect on how it is we're going to move forward in the industry.
Michael Ramos with Democrats Abroad in Australia. Thank you so much for sharing some insights with us here on ABC News.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Miriam. Appreciate it.
Well, America has voted for Joe Biden, but President Donald Trump hasn't conceded and is refuting the result. It's a difficult situation, with Mr Trump wanting to go to the courts. Our ambassador to the US, Arthur Sinodinos, explained Australia's position earlier on Insiders.
We're taking the position that the election has been called. The President has the right to contest this in the courts, but we, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, India, France, Germany and others have taken a view based on the information that's been provided by the networks and others who have called it, that this is the case. But as I say, it's a free country. These matters can be challenged in the courts.
Was there any coordination amongst those countries you listed there to respond in the way that you have?
No, not in any formal sense. I mean, I think we were all, particularly here in Washington, among the various embassies, wondering, you know, when the election might be called, but there's not been that sort of coordination, no.
But some informal discussion amongst the embassies in Washington about this?
Well, Washington is that sort of town. You talk about everything, and this is the biggest issue in town, and that was something we've been talking to people about all week. About
when to actually congratulate Joe Biden, given this situation?
No. Initially, the discussions were about what was going on, trying to work out what was going to happen, and then, as things became clearer, what the next steps might be. Look, it's part of the job of a diplomat here to work out what other people are doing, put the information mosaic together, and then work out what is the best advice to your own government.
Look, do you believe that President Donald Trump, with his unfounded claims of fraud, the election being stolen, is he trying to undermine the democratic system? Because it's a democracy, any candidate in an election has the right, if they believe that there are issues, to take those issues forward, and that's what the President is doing. But he's doing more than that. He's saying there's been fraud. He's saying the election's being stolen.
And what I'm saying, he has the right to present whatever evidence he may have in that regard to courts, undertake challenges and all the rest of it, and the courts and the relevant election authorities can work that out.
But he's doing more than that.
But ultimately, David, it's for their system. David, it's for their system to work all of this through.
Arthur Sinodinos speaking to David Spears there on Insiders early today. Now, Jeff Bleich is the former US ambassador to Australia. He says the difference in tone of the incoming president and vice president is immediately obvious.
I think I was struck by the fact that they were presidential and vice presidential. They were thoughtful, they were unifying, they were fair, they were committed to issues that Americans all care about. And it's what you hope for when someone is stepping up into this role, the most important role in the United States. I think there are a number of people who have been thirsting for fact-based, science-based, thoughtful policymaking. They have not been getting that, and for people like that, it feels as though, they've been being punched in the face for 4 years, and suddenly they can see that the punching's going to stop. And there was this just huge relief that was experienced all across America. Celebrations, spontaneous celebrations everywhere about that realization. And I think Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden now, and Vice President-elect Harris both met that moment by talking about the things that unify us and by a commitment to science, facts, and making good choices for the American people. My conclusion is that democracy is strong. I mean, people really showed up for this election. that we had unprecedented turnout. And notwithstanding the legal claims that have been filed, there's no question in this country. Donald Trump did not lose because of some sort of trickery. Joe Biden was not elected by trickery or by fraud. He was elected by the people, and people have spoken. I think that a number of our allies and partners around the world are relieved by the thought of a more predictable, a more normal American foreign policy, which understands that our strength around the world is based upon values, upon a rules-based order, and upon having more friends in the world than enemies. And so by working with our partners and allies, we can advance those common values and ensure that the law applies around the world so that human rights are respected and that our values that have made Australia and the United States so strong will continue to have the right voice around the world. And so I think that's one of the things we're all looking forward to. I think the strategic interests of the United States vis-a-vis China are important ones, and we will continue to protect our interests in the Indo-Pacific, where we've invested so much over the last 70 years. I think what you'll find, though, will be two things that are fundamentally different. One is a commitment to the rules-based order and to alliances in the region. We aren't going to be going it alone against China. We're going to be working with Australia and other partners to come up with a common set of principles that we think will benefit everyone, including China, if they commit to work with us. I think the second thing you'll find is just a smarter way of approaching issues such as trade. One of the things that always struck me is that Donald Trump unsigned the TPP, something that China desperately wanted America to do, and didn't ask for anything in return from China. He just undid the Trans-Pacific Partnership for nothing. And then later on started a trade war when, if you were looking for concessions, he had a moment of great leverage and he never used it. I think you're going to see a person who understands Xi Jinping, who understands international diplomacy, who has worked in foreign policy and in statecraft for over 40 years, and who's not going to make those sorts of rookie mistakes. He's going to make some very smart decisions that I think our allies and partners will be encouraged by and will want to stand behind. Vice President Biden has a very strong and deep and profound commitment to our allies around the world, and particularly Australia. He and I would talk about Australia regularly when I was U.S. ambassador there, and in subsequent years we continued to stay in touch over those issues. He understands the Indo-Pacific in a profound way, and he understands the challenges that Australia has been facing over the last few years. And I think you can count on him as a strong ally in addressing those issues because they reflect a common set of interests between our country and Australia, our great friend.
Jeffrey Bleish speaking with us earlier. Let's take a look now at the way things stand with Casey Briggs.
President-elect Joseph Biden Jr. has won a comfortable, a convincing victory in the Electoral College, if perhaps not the landslide that some Democrats were daring to hope for, having seen the polling. Certainly not in the order of the Obama 2008 victory, where much more of that map was coloured blue and there was quite a gap in the popular vote. But he has done what he needed to do. He's rebuilt this blue wall of Midwestern states, not picked up maybe some more that he would have liked, but picked up the three most important ones, the ones that Donald Trump managed to eke out wins in 4 years ago and claim the presidency off the back of, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. He also looks to have picked up perhaps the state of Arizona. Counting is still going on there. Not all US networks have called that state and the margin has been narrowing. So a little bit more counting to be done there, but Joe Biden does look to have won and does look to be the favourite. And Georgia as well, he could have picked up on the Sun Belt, some southern states that are now being added to the Democrat column for the first time in more than 2 decades. He would have liked a state like Florida. He would have liked a state like North Carolina, where, again, counting's still going on, but Donald Trump would seem to be the favourite, with postal votes still to come in. But he's done exactly what he needed to, and the call finally came through. There's been an air of sort of inevitability to it for a little while now. The call finally came through from the US networks in the wee hours of this morning, when this margin went beyond 0.5%, the automatic recount threshold. We expect there are some more votes still coming in. We expect this margin to grow. So Joe Biden has a viable path to 306 Electoral College votes. That's exactly what Donald Trump won 4 years ago, and he called that a landslide at the time. There's a viable path there, but even if he doesn't get all the way to 306, he's won, and I think for many that's all that matters. The one downside is partly because of not quite as strong a performance as they might have hoped. The Democrats probably, or have definitely not at this point, won control of the Senate as they'd hoped. There are a couple of recount elections where the fate of the Senate is up for grabs, and they may have gone backwards in the House of Representatives. So a comfortable win that they'll take, maybe a more mediocre result down the ticket.
Casey Briggs there. Well, let's now consider what a Biden presidency might mean for America's foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East. Amin Saikal is an adjunct professor of social sciences with the University of Western Australia and an expert on the Middle East. He joins us now from Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. Professor Saikal, thanks for joining us on ABC News. As we all start to process what a presidency under Joe Biden will mean, of course, considerations now turning to foreign policy in the Middle East. How do you envisage that Joe Biden will be wanting to frame setting a relationship in the Middle East, given that it still continues to be an area where we see diverse political positions and conflicts as well?
I think President-elect Biden is most likely to follow the policy approach that has been adopted by President Obama towards the Middle East. I mean, there are 4 areas where he's most likely to focus. One is the Iran nuclear deal, which was signed in 2015, but of course President Trump withdrew from it in 2018. Biden has already indicated that he will revive that agreement and restore United States participation in that agreement. The second area is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and President-elect has already said that he would not recognize the legitimacy of the settlements in the occupied territories, which basically means essentially a reversal of Trump's policies, and he will put more emphasis on a resolution of the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis on the basis of a 2-state solution. And the third area where I think he's most likely to act is to withdraw America's support for the war in Yemen, which has proved to be very devastating for the people of Yemen. And so far, President Trump had strongly supported the Saudi-led coalition's operations in Yemen, but the president-elect is unlikely to maintain that support. And of course, there is a fourth area where he could really be very active, and that is to build bridges between various countries in the region in order to bring a degree of regional cooperation. Of course, he's going to face enormous challenges in doing this sort of thing, simply because that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, supported perhaps by some of the Arab leaders, will be totally opposed to President Trump or President-elect Biden renegotiating, or for that matter, adopting a more conciliatory approach towards Iran in order to entice the Iranian leadership to renegotiate that nuclear agreement.
Tell us more about those headwinds that Joe Biden is likely to face in making these decisions, because not all these decisions and these approaches by Barack Obama were particularly favourable domestically or in the regions.
Well, I mean, you will face, of course, challenges domestically and also in the region. I think domestically, if he doesn't control the Senate, which at this point it is unbalanced, he may face a very hostile action from the Republicans in the Senate. And of course, they've been the ones that have been very much opposed to any kind of really rapprochement with Iran unless the Iranians give in to America's demand for renegotiating the nuclear agreement, which could meet the interests of the United States. One must not also forget that Israel has bipartisan support in the American Congress, and of course it's not going to be easy for the president-elect to achieve the goal of a political settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, just in the same way that President Obama had faced enormous difficulties in that area. But I think the third area, and I think that he could call off United States support for the continuation of the war in Yemen. And I think that's one area that he could possibly tell the Saudi leadership that he is no longer in favor of America's support for the continuation of that war. But another area that I think he was most likely to press for, but of course that's not going to happen immediately, and that is to pressure the region for anti-authoritarian reforms. And that will affect the United States relations with a number of Arab countries in the region. And beyond that, of course, it will also affect United States relations with Israel.
Professor Saikal, how important will it be to enhance the work of, for instance, the United Nations? Because, of course, a lot of these issues will require a coalition of allies, broad agreement in order to achieve inroads, particularly when we're talking about countries like Iran. I mean, that has been such a fraught situation, and I've noticed that apparently the response of the Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, today has been that they've seen the election and the result as an indication of weakening of the United States. How important is it to see the United States as part of a global framework?
Well, I think, Biden's approach is going to be multilateral. I think he will build up coalitions and the support of the policies that he wants to implement. By restoring America's participation in the Iran nuclear agreement, he would be also bringing or improving United States relations with some of its traditional European allies, and most importantly, of course, France, Germany, and Britain, which are the signatories to that agreement. I think one could have expected the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to make that sort of a statement. But at the same time, there are forces in Iran which should be very pleased that President Trump would be out of the way, and Biden, who has already said that he will be more conciliatory towards Iran. I think President-elect's approach would be to do whatever possible to entice the Iranians to come to the negotiating table, and by just restoring United States participation in the agreement, I think that might really work with a number of forces in Iranian politics. I mean, Iranian politics is not monolithic. It is just as divided in many ways as American politics, and therefore that there are different forces which are really in action. I'm very confident that particularly the moderate forces in the Islamic Republic would be very much in favor of reaching some sort of accommodation with the United States.
Professor Ahmed Saikal, terrific to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
North America correspondent Catherine Diss is in Wilmington, Delaware, where Joe Biden delivered his victory speech. We spoke with her not long after the event.
We were just outside the headquarters among the crowds, and it was an incredibly jubilant scene. The sea of people and the signs of support for Joe Biden, particularly here in his home state of Delaware, are overwhelming, really. The feeling of unity, the feeling of hope, and a shift towards potentially what some people here on the ground think will be a better, more united America. America, and that's certainly the message that we got from Joe Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris tonight as they took to the stage to formally declare that they were the winners of this US election. They said essentially that democracy was on the ticket this election. It was on the line. American democracy was in the hands of the American people, and they have voted to keep it and to bring this country back together. And the scenes that we were seeing, outside the Biden camp tonight, among those people, the common people on the ground, was much like what we've been seeing in Philadelphia on the streets, which of course was the city which tipped the state of Pennsylvania in Joe Biden's favour and secured him this historic victory.
So it is it must be such an amazing moment then to be in the state where that crucial vote, that count that went for 4 days, to be amongst that moment and to see the result as it's come through. And of course, it's as you mentioned there, President-elect, Joe Biden's home state. So just an extra layer of significance, I suppose, for the moment when people finally got to hear him speak.
Absolutely. We've heard him speak, though, Miriam, for a number of days now since Election Day, and I think that was very deliberate. He wanted to show that he was being presidential at a moment when the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was being anything but that. He was disputing an election that was being undertaken rightfully, and also all of those ballots being counted legitimately. So he really wanted to try and portray the optics of him being presidential in this moment, and for him to come to the stage and officially declare it, he's shown a great deal of patience and restraint holding off from declaring that, but that's also sort of a key message that we've had this entire campaign, that Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. That's been the key message that they have run on, and they've continued that right through until there was a decisive victory here tonight. But being on the streets of Philadelphia at that moment, when it was formally announced and declared by all of the cable news television stations here that he had been declared the victor, was electric. The overwhelming enthusiasm and excitement for a time beyond what we're currently seeing now was everywhere, but also there was an overwhelming sense of relief that they now had finally found out who would be their next leader.
Catherine, you've been reporting for months now on supporters of Joe Biden and Donald Trump and how they saw the race. What about in the last few hours, in the last couple of days? How do people think about Donald Trump, particularly his supporters?
Look, I think, Jeremy, we've got a deeply divided country here. Although Joe Biden managed to secure the largest number of votes of any candidate in history, that being around 75 million, Donald Trump secured 70 million, which is still a large number of the voting public here. So I suppose it depends on who you ask as to who and how they view the opposite party. But just being, on the streets of Philadelphia earlier today, the divide was ever apparent. And whilst there was a larger number of those in the Joe Biden camp, being within a Democratic city, on the other side of the street was the supporters for the President Donald Trump, who firmly believe that this election has been stolen. They believe what Donald Trump has been saying about widespread voter fraud. They believe that this election needs to go back to a recount, and that there have been votes that have been counted that aren't legitimate. And I think that they will continue to hold those views until the President, Donald Trump, decides to stand down and declare that he has not won this election, and that Joe Biden is to become the 46th President of the United States.
Interesting as well, Catherine, we haven't as yet, to my knowledge, heard any response or reaction from President Donald Trump. But bringing us back to that point, because both Kamala Harris and Joe Biden talked about the importance of things like integrity, decency, truth and science, as well as acknowledging the coronavirus pandemic, the staggering number of deaths that have been recorded, new cases as well, and just pointing to the work ahead, saying there that they are ready to take up the reins. It's going to be an incredible amount of work, though, to turn what is such an uncontrollable pandemic around.
Yeah, look, we haven't heard from the president since, although he was busy on the golf course today. He has tweeted a number of times this morning saying that he believes that this election has been stolen and that he's rightfully the winner, and saying that he will continue to pursue legal action over the result and not concede. But if we bring out, if we look at the bigger picture right now, he's continuing to launch these legal actions in the face of more than 120,000 Americans dying every day from the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has been a strong element of the Biden-Kamala Harris campaign, in that they would get to work as soon as they managed to get their feet under the desk, so to speak. And they even spoke about that tonight, that there's plenty of work to be done. They're already working, we understand, on a plan to be able to tackle the pandemic, and really they need to look beyond that towards the economic recovery. I mean, this country is suffering through an economic recession it hasn't seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. So there is a lot of work to be done. They have acknowledged that. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have said that there is a lot of work to be done. It won't be easy, but they are determined to get this country back to a place where it is more united and common decency is what prevails.
Catherine, just for our viewers, Donald Trump has only tweeted 5 times in the last 11 hours, and a couple of those tweets have been fact-checked by Twitter, saying his claims are disputed, that there are no official sources that had called the race when he claimed to have won the election by a lot. Now, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris gave their speeches, they made references to science being part of the framework of this handover and part of their administration. That does appear to be a repudiation of the sorts of claims, wild claims, unsubstantiated evidence that's been presented by Donald Trump over and over again throughout his presidency.
Absolutely. The fact checkers at Twitter have been in overdrive, it's probably safe to say. If you look at his Twitter feed, there's a wall of tweets that have been slapped with fact check labels. And I think that's another defining element between the Trump presidency and what is likely to become the Joe Biden presidency, in that he is willing to back the science to be able to beat the coronavirus, which is something that Donald Trump has not done during his period, during his handling and leadership of the pandemic. We've seen him put the economy above the advice of the scientific experts here. He's wanted to try and rush ahead and reopen the economy because that was the thing that he'd hoped to campaign on, to be able to go forward for re-election. And it's something that he still did in the last remaining weeks of this election campaign, get strong ticks and marks from the American public for. They still overwhelmingly trusted Donald Trump over Joe Biden on the economy. But at the end of the day, it hasn't worked. The number of people that are being infected with coronavirus continues to grow. More than 120,000 Americans are being infected every day with the virus, and upwards of 1,000 people are dying. So that is a key focus of what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are saying will be one of their first tasks when they get to work.
And in his first address as President-elect, Joe Biden sought to soothe the divisions that defined the last 4 years in US politics, urging the end to a grim era of demonisation in America.
Former senior advisor to President-elect Joe Biden, Mo Vella, says Biden is just the man for the job.
If he can't do it, frankly, nobody can. And I'll tell you why I say that. The man's entire career was built on his ability to build relationships that are mutually filled with trust and mutual respect. right? When he was a senator, he worked across the aisle. You can see his whole career. That's what it means something to him, is his ability to connect with people, and not just people who agree with him, not just people who share his ideology. By the way, to the people of Australia, this matters, because what Joe Biden will do as president is rebuild our alliance with Australia and rekindle that amazing friendship our two countries have always had, that maybe hasn't been as warm these last 4 years as it was before. It will be back, and we will be back to have a strong and loving friendship with our brothers and sisters in Australia, and I can't wait.
To Americans, how important is it to re-establish those foreign relationships when there are so many other domestic concerns such as coronavirus and the economy?
Well, the one thing Joe Biden recognizes, and I can say this with confidence, he understands the power that comes from having our global family in a healthy and functional relationship status. So it means a lot, okay, to the American people, that we understand that we got to work on our domestic issues, the virus, the economy, healthcare, education, infrastructure, climate change. But simultaneous, a good leader and a good president also is working globally with our international families across the world, right, and around the globe, and our friends like Australia. So look, it matters to us. We understand that we need our allies around the world. We've got to have those strong relationships. Why? We are a global family now, and we are, more importantly, a global economy. So those relationships are an absolute must, and I think most Americans understand that.
Mo, is it fair to say, as a point of difference as well, Donald Trump was very much a leader who went out on his own in a lot of respects. Is Joe Biden going to present himself in that inclusive way, a team player? I mean, we look to, you know, who's standing beside him in this. We've got the Vice President-elect now, Kamala Harris. How do you see Joe Biden actually conducting himself as a leader?
I have worked for him, as you both know. I consider him a dear friend, and the Biden family are dear friends of mine. I will tell you something. I don't think Joe Biden knows any other way to function. I've never seen him be anything other than inclusive, equality-minded, and have that loving spirit I referenced earlier. I've never seen him behave in any other way in any setting whatsoever. So absolutely, he's going to lead and govern in that way. And let me say something about Kamala Harris. What a great day for us in the United States, for every little girl across our land to see what one day they can be. And it is I've got goosebumps just telling you that. What a great glass ceiling that has been shattered. And Joe Biden deserves credit for that, for having, as Kamala Harris said tonight, the audacity to pick a black woman. And it is long overdue, and it is a beautiful day for America because of that. It is awesome.
Mo Vella there. Well, two former Australian Prime Ministers have welcomed the news of Joe Biden's victory. Speaking on Insiders this morning, Malcolm Turnbull said the win is a relief, while Kevin Rudd said the US can now work on repairing deep divisions.
Important for us all simply to say, as people who are members of the worldwide democratic family, congratulations Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. This is a great win. And for those who seem to have inferred that this is going to be a narrow win, if you look at the outstanding states, Joe Biden is on track to, in fact, end up with more Electoral College votes than Trump did in 2016, and certainly a bigger slice of the popular votes. And it's time for everyone in the United States and around the world to move on, because the challenges facing the world with the pandemic, with climate change, with global economic recovery are massive.
Well, it's a relief to have a return to normal transmission, to have an administration that is going to be consistent, that isn't going to be, making decisions by wild tweets in the early hours of the morning, that isn't going to be walking out of global treaties and alliances, discombobulating friends and foes alike. I mean, it is the 4 years of Trump have been a very, very disruptive period. I mean, it's left the United States, the most important in a democracy in the world, in the most important country in the world, much more divided than it was at the beginning of 4 years. I mean,
well, in other news, from midnight tonight, the boundary between Melbourne and regional Victoria will be abolished, along with the 25-kilometre limit on movement. It's part of Victoria's next step out of coronavirus restrictions, announced today by Premier Daniel Andrews.
Restaurants and pubs will be able to have up to 40 patrons indoors and 70 outside. Gyms and indoor sports centres can operate with up to 20 people. It comes as Victoria recorded no new coronavirus cases and no deaths for a 9th consecutive day.
Victoria will be once again united as one single state. The 25-kilometre travel limit will go. The Melbourne regional Victoria border comes down. Families will be able to be together again. Hospitality venues will increase to 40 people inside and 70 people outside. Faith gatherings will increase to 50 people outdoors and 20 people inside. Funerals up to 20 people indoors and 50 outdoors. Care facility visits, one household per day for 2 hours. Those visits will be allowed. They've been it's been very challenging, I know, for people not to be able to visit those in a health service or in an aged care facility, but there will be the possibility for one household to visit per day for 2 hours.
New South Wales recorded no new locally acquired coronavirus cases in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night. There were 3 cases in hotel quarantine, with almost 14,000 tests carried out.
New South Wales Health is currently treating 63 COVID-19 cases, with 1 patient in intensive care. And that is the very latest from the ABC News team. Remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au, along with iView and the ABC Listen app. Our colleague Gemma Vaness will be here shortly with more reaction to the US election. Plus, we'll play the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden victory speech in full.
That's great. Thank you for your company.
This week on News Breakfast.